Hello, and welcome to my Business 791 Leadership Organizational Resilience final project. My name is Shane Corcoran, and today I will be talking about a Wisconsin PPO health insurer and providing my crisis audit findings of the company. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. The agenda for today is as follows. I want to give you a little bit of context into why I picked this topic, so we'll start there. We'll then move into crisis management generally and the need to have an agile and resilient organization to be successful. From there, I'll run a little bit of an overview of the Wisconsin PPO that's in question, and then set up the field research and analysis model that I decided to use. Once we go through that analysis that I went through, we'll then finish it up by me articulate whether I think Wisconsin PPO has the capabilities of resilience and what opportunities I see there to help lean into those. All right, so first up, I think it's important to understand and to give you a little context about why I picked this project, or why I picked this subject for the final project. The first is, I wanted to be practical, so I actually do work for a company and am interested in strategic leadership. And for me, a lot of this education for this entire program is really how can I find applicable models that I can bring back to my company and really help make and drive change. And so I wanted to kind of use a real world example and apply some practical tools and methodologies to that. So that's why it was practical. I used my organization. It's one that I am pretty familiar with and understanding some of the ins and outs. So I am kind of familiar with that. And then generally, I'm just curious. So I work for this company, and so I definitely want to make sure that it is set up for success in the future. And I'm with everything that's kind of been going on since I've been there. I generally am curious to know if, based on my findings, the company would be considered a resilient company prepared for the future, as that might, drive what I want to do and if I'm going to stay here. Okay, so first up, let's talk about crisis management, sort of the need for agility. Author John C. Maxwell, I think, really summed up the need for change, or just kind of articulating an ever-changing landscape when he says change is inevitable, but growth is optional. I really love that. I think that's spot on. The world is changing by the minute, and we as organizations and individuals are always having to reorganize and restructure incoming stimulus and opportunities and threats against what we already know. So change is always coming, and it's always sort of happening. Whether or not we leverage that to our advantage and grow from that is kind of up to us. And so I really just like that quote by John. We learned earlier in this course that it's really important for leadership of any organization to come to the consensus or in reality that crisis will happen. It's not really a question of if it'll happen, but more when and the extent of which it impacts all of your various different stakeholders. And so one thing that we sort of learned that kind of really hit home is organizations, I think, generally will want to kind of plan their way out of this, right? They want to find what they can do to mitigate all risk and mitigate any potential crisis from from coming. But what we've learned is that planning is useful and it has its purpose, but it also can serve as a detriment, and it is not the only thing that we need to be focused on. So researcher Combs really talked about the idea of a crisis communication plan, or a CCP, that organizations have these and develop them. And I really like to synopsis around, kind of their importance, but also that they are not the end all be all. And so what I'm going to quote is from him, and I really like it. And he said this in 2019. If an organization has done any crisis preparation, it's usually the drafting of a crisis communication plan, or a CCP. While important, a CCP is not a magical instrument, a magic insurance policy that protects an organization from crisis, nor is it a step-by-step set of instructions for what to do when a crisis hits. It may contain the information needed to manage a crisis, but it should not be overly long and cumbersome. Long CCPs look nice on the shelves as they collect dust, but are not practical when a crisis hits. Smart crisis managers know a CCP does not tell them exactly what to do to handle a crisis. Crisis creates uncertainty, and no single plan will be able to anticipate all of the subtle twists and turns that come from that. And I really sort of like that, right? They are important and they do serve their purpose, but a lot of times I think companies really lean into them and expect that this document, documented at a point in time, is going to solve all problems when it's really not. So another, researcher, Somers, in 2009, really kind of talked about, how planning can kind of be a detriment to growth and really being able to manage crisis. And he was quoting two other research, Wyke and Sutcliffe, and saying that believing that planning on a preconceived way to deal with hazards actually discourages organizations from recognizing and responding to the unique challenges of each event, right? So it is helpful to plan, but being so prescriptive really will just become a detriment, and you may not be able to really get around a lot of the situational conditions that come in when a crisis does actually happen. There's other research that I really liked from Hamill, and I always get her name mixed up. I apologize. From Val Kangas in 2003, when they really talked about organizations and companies not aspiring to have zero trauma, right? The idea that that crisis is never going to happen is an unrealistic one, but that the idea is that the idea isn't that we don't have zero crisis, is that we have zero trauma when crisis does arise, and that we really are spending time and understanding our stakeholders and what they are needing out of our relationship, and how a company could really leverage kind of some of that existing knowledge when crises do arise with those stakeholders, to make sure that navigating that is just less traumatic for both parties, right? And I really kind of like that. It's understanding that you're not going to be free of crisis, but how can we soften the blow as much as possible, right? And so really, I think this all comes down to just focusing on the stakeholder and finding ways to best engage with them, right? And it's not so much, again, being prescriptive, but understanding their needs and the understanding the reason of why your stakeholder is involved with you and what value they gain from that relationship, and understanding how, when a crisis does arise, we can navigate that best with them. So now I think it's important for us to kind of take a look at the Wisconsin PPO. We have taken a look at crisis management and the need for being agility and the need for planning, but not being super prescriptive. And so let's take a look at the company and move into this analysis.